What's up, Tesla family? It's Ray J back with another video. And in this one, I want to break down what's happening with Tesla SPY and the overall market. I'm going to break down some very important things that Donald Trump said that contributed to why the market saw a sell off. I'm going to talk about other factors involving PCE data coming out for tomorrow, which you should be watching for as time goes on. Just notes that I am not a financial planner, so take nothing I say as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out my Moomoo link. If you deposit $100, you're guaranteed 5 free stocks. If you deposit $2,000, you're guaranteed 30 in total, and the offer ends at the end of March. Anyways, as far as Tesla's going, you guys can see there's quite clearly a downtrend. I think Tesla will easily fill this gap back down towards that 250 area as we look more bearish. But we will see if we get some kind of temporary bounce or not. For now, the chart does look bearish with no signs of that. And right now, the bears have a bigger edge. So I'll talk more about the charts in just a couple of minutes. We did see Tesla try to bounce a little bit after some good news came out for once. We saw some news about how Tesla is seeking some approvals to offer a robotaxi service in California. This is very promising, and this is a good piece of news as Tesla's continuing to expand the scope of their technologies. However, it wasn't really enough to offset the downside. We're still seeing lots of negative news about how Tesla's share price is at one of the lowest levels we've seen since election day. It's also at a very, very low level relative to where it was before, as the valuation's below $1 trillion. And there's been a lot of negative news involving their overall sales. So we're still seeing lots of bad news, unfortunately. That's why Tesla is in the red still. It wasn't really enough to offset this. The whole market got a big rug pull despite the fact that it tried to bounce. Nvidia was also in the red. So we're going to talk about exactly what's going on. Nvidia had good earnings, but much of that was priced in. It wasn't really enough to get the share price to run. We pumped initially. We were up like 3% at one point, and then we saw this big sell-off. Nvidia dumped 8%. Apple's in the red. Microsoft, big tech are in the red. Tesla dumped. Almost every stock is in the red, and we just have finance that's kind of flat right now. Our ETFs and futures are in the red, so what's going on? We have PCE data coming out for tomorrow, and I will talk more about that in more detail. But keep in mind, there's a lot of fear right now about the economy, lots of fear about not only recession, but our overall business activity slowing down. And then on top of that, we have Donald Trump continuing to make announcements about his tariffs. Let's talk about why this contributes to why the market sold off. So keep in mind, bad economic data, fears about the current state of the economy, and then Donald Trump's tariffs are the main reasons why we're seeing a big sell-off like this. And then we have other bad pieces of news coming to individual big tech stocks. If you look like Apple, for example, they had negative news about their iPhone sales, bad news for Tesla involving their sales, and the list goes on. So what did Donald Trump say? We're going to talk about Donald Trump's tariffs first, and I'll talk about more economic data. Well, Donald Trump said yesterday, I actually have some quotes on my phone I'm going to read to you guys. He said that the decision on tariffs on the EU is 25%. Then he started to go on about how the EU can retaliate if it wants to, but the EU tariffs will still be 25% on autos and other things. Then Donald Trump said that the US will invest in China. China will not be able to take advantage of the US anymore. The relationship is going to remain good. However, the tariffs will go on, not all, but a lot of them. There's no stopping the tariffs. We'll still have good relationships, but they are going to continue. So that's what Donald Trump said yesterday. Then we have even more things that he said. Donald Trump said on Thursday that tariffs on goods from Canada and Mexico will sharply increase on March 4th. Then he also announced additional 10% tariffs on Chinese goods. So Donald Trump, first off, wants to increase tariffs on Canada and Mexico to 25%. Now he's saying he wants to increase tariffs more on China. So that's a very, very big piece of news. He mentions that he wants to do this to offset a lot of issues, to do this for fairness, and so that the U.S. is not getting taken advantage of. So that's what Donald Trump's perspective has been so far, at least on those specific countries. Then he announced something else that's even bigger. So he said, Donald Trump also said this, he wants to impose 25% tariffs on goods coming from the European Union. And he said that they may retaliate, but that doesn't really change his view. That's what he said. And that includes 27 countries that could be raising prices for American consumers. He mentioned, this is what Donald Trump said, that the EU is created to screw over the USA. He said that the EU has been taking advantage of the USA for a long time. He said, and I quote, they don't accept our cars, they don't accept essentially our farm products, and we accept everything from them. He also continues to threaten tariffs on goods from these different countries, so just keep that in mind. Looking at more data, Donald Trump's approach is very, very blunt and straightforward. The EU is pretty much just very much in favor of protectionism against the US. That's what some quotes have been saying. But despite that, this will have a big effect on prices. Now, whether we get some kind of retaliation, we'll have to see about that. But these are some prices that could be affected according to the Global Stats database. So these could be affecting the new tariffs on the EU, could be affecting mechanical appliances and electrical equipment, pharmaceutical products, vehicles and aircraft, optical instruments, and then lots of agricultural and food products, including wines, liquors, processed cereals, and other processed foods, beer, apple cider, dairy products, and then we also have organic chemicals, oil, gas, and coal, and the list goes on. So this is going to be affecting all kinds of products, right? Especially appliances, and then lots of like car prices, and the list goes on. That's on top of the Chinese tariffs affecting manufacturing, on top of the Mexican tariffs affecting food and automakers. And then we also have the Canadian tariffs, which will be affecting lots of goods, including petroleum, natural gas, and factors like that. So it's going to be affecting all these different countries, all these different prices. I think there's about 600 billion plus dollars worth of imports that come to the US from Europe, the EU at least. And that's going to be once again affecting about $600 billion worth of products from what I've read. We'll still see the specific details, so I think some things are to be determined, but that's some massive, massive news from Donald Trump, and that's what's affecting the markets. Then we have more quotes from Donald Trump. I think today and yesterday he did say more things. He mentioned once again that, so there are some sources that say that there's a possibility that the tariffs are going to be delayed up until like April 2nd. I don't know about that, guys. I didn't hear Donald Trump actually say that. Donald Trump said the EU tariffs are coming very soon, but I don't think that the tariffs are going to be delayed until April 2nd for like Canada and Mexico. I don't know yet. I'll give you guys an update if I see that. For now, I heard Donald Trump say March 4th is the deadline. So we'll see if that changes. And then on top of that, he said the same thing. He said he wants to be put tariffs on cars and all other things. So just keep that in mind. And then he mentioned that pharmaceuticals will be affected by this and semiconductors eventually. So he did say that. And that's very, very important. So that's what Donald Trump has been, going on about for the last week. He's been screaming he wants to increase tariffs on this country, the EU, and the list goes on. That is causing more fear for the markets. We're at extreme fear right now. The market's not showing signs of bottom yet, unless we hold this support on SPY and the others. I'll talk about the levels in a few minutes. I do want to note that the S&P 500 is at the 125 daily moving average. Even though we're at extreme fear, that's a big support. So we'll have to see if this support holds where we're at. And then the put to call option ratio is at extreme fear. We're super, super fearful right now. That's very important to note. The VIX is breaking out, and we'll have to see how it reacts to resistance. So for now, the market is very scared. Now, why is the market dumping with these tariffs? Let me go over this just real quick. Then I'll talk about some more data, and then I'll talk about the charts. So what's going on with this? The first thing you have to remember is that with all these tariffs, okay, this is just a glimpse of what he wants to do, right? We have Mexico, Canada, China, the EU. There's also the possibility that later on down the line, India, Thailand, Taiwan, Vietnam, Japan, Malaysia, all of these countries will get involved as well. Keep that in mind. The cons of this, what is bad about this, at least for the short term? Okay, there's good things and bad things that will come out of this. I'm going to be very unbiased when I say this. What's bad, and this is what Elon Musk and Trump have both said, that there's going to be a short-term disruption. Musk and Trump argue that it's worth it. You may or may not agree with that. That's what they are arguing. The cons of this would be that this is negative for our GDP. This could be affecting trade. This could even de-incentivize some countries to trade as much with the US. And then this causes more prices for Americans and such. So the direct effect is a little bit more negative for GDP. It's going to be affecting demand and such. Higher inflation could be coming for the short term. So inflation is going to remain at a positive level. It's going to continue to show that prices go up over time. What do I mean? Look at the 1970s, the 1980s. Prices were way cheaper back then. But as decades pass, inflation, it's at a positive level, so prices do go up. But there are particular periods where prices go up faster and slower, right? For the last couple of years, inflation's been going up at a faster rate, as you guys can see in prices for goods, groceries, and etc. So when I say higher inflation for the short term, what I don't mean is that prices go up and they go down. I'm not saying that at all. What I am saying is prices will go up faster. They're going to go a little bit. They're going to go up a little bit faster than before for a short period of time, and then for the longer term, the rate at which they increase is going to normalize for that 2% rate, which is what the Fed is looking for over the next 5, 6, 7 years. I hope that's as clear as possible. For the short term, prices go up more sharply. For the longer term, they will. They're going to continue to go up at a slower rate, basically. That's what tends to happen historically. Now, other countries may also try to increase tariffs back on the US. So keep that in mind. There's talk about how the EU might try to retaliate now. This is going to cause more bankruptcies and kind of hurt businesses to some extent. So sure. So if you look at an example like Apple, for example, right? The iPhones are not being produced in America. They're producing their iPhones all over the world. It involves like minerals to be mined. It involves parts to be produced in China, and the list goes on. So we don't have an alternative right now. And it's going to take Apple a while to do that. Apple announced they want to be investing hundreds of billions back into the US. They want to hire 20,000 more US employees. They said that, but it takes time to do that. So that's going to be affecting their business. Some businesses may have to, go bankrupt. Some businesses have to get away from trading with different countries. It's going to cause a lot of disruptions. Okay, those are the cons, chiefly for like the short term. There's going to be negative effects of these tariffs, right? We could all agree on that. Elon Musk and Trump even said that. But the argument is that number one, this could be used for negotiations. Donald Trump did that before with Canada and Mexico. I did talk about that previously. For fairness, Donald Trump claims that there's lots of these trade deficits and this is necessary. If countries charge a certain rate, he thinks that it's right for the US to charge them back that much. That's his opinion. I'm not going to say he's right or wrong, but that's what I want to just make very, very clear. And then the last thing is that this is going to be increasing governmental revenue. So what I mean by that is that the government's revenue is going to go up. There's, I think, a study that found that the US government may make like trillions over the next 4 years. Depending on the tariffs, though, and how much trade happens, I don't think we could truly say that until we see the numbers. But let's just say the government does make trillions of more dollars over the next couple of years, over the next like 4 years during Trump's administration. Well, can the government take that money and reinvest in the US? Can we offset our negative GDP? Can we try to do something very differently? We'll see about that. I can't make any promises about that, but that is what Donald Trump is arguing. So are the negative effects worth it for the long-term effects, the positive ones? I don't know, guys. Like that's not my place to really make that claim, but this is what Donald Trump is arguing. Donald Trump is saying it's going to be worth it for fairness. He claims he's standing up for the US and he's saying that this will help bring in more revenue. But many Americans may argue that with the hardships they're already facing, with high prices already, it may not be worth it. So who knows, guys? I'm just here to give you guys the facts. You guys can decide what you think. I'm just here to be unbiased. Trump is prioritizing Mexico, Canada, and China. And then we have the EU, which is the next biggest trade partner technically as a whole. When you combine a bunch of European countries, it becomes the next biggest trade partner. And then after that, you have like Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Vietnam. Eventually, he might start announcing tariffs on more Asian countries. He's just slowly doing it one after another. So keep that in mind. So what do I see for Tesla in the markets from this point on, guys? There's been a lot of fear with these tariffs. People are panicking. Well, we have a 2.62 put to call ratio for SPY for tomorrow. There's a lot of puts expiring. But right now, Tesla's at this very close to this gap support at this 280 area. If 280 fails for Tesla, we're going to be at risk of hitting 275. And then if that fails us, we fill the gap to 250 pretty quickly. There's not much support holding us from there. If we try to hold 280, you want to see Tesla get back above this like 291 area. If we do break past that resistance, I'm looking for an attempt to get back up to 300. Could go either way because we already dumped so much without much of a bounce. But just keep in mind that the trend for the last 4 days has been lower highs and lower lows. Now, whether we get a bounce also depends on our PCE data coming out for tomorrow. PCE is very similar to CPI. For core PCE, we're expecting 0.3 to 0.4%, a slight increase. And also for core PCE year over year, we're expecting 2.6 to 2.7%. When CPI came out, the numbers were hot. We got a hot CPI, inflation went up, so there's a chance we might see the same thing with the PCE report. And we'll see how this ends up affecting the markets. Will this cause the market to dump and then we get a bounce, or does the market continue to just, gap up and then dump? It all depends on how we end up opening and what this data looks like. So I'll give you guys an analysis of that by tomorrow, but that's going to be very important. Keep in mind, inflation is going up, so there's a high probability we see another increase in inflation, and that might not be the best for the market. So that makes me a little bit concerned. For the last 5-6 days, the market gaps up and dumps, gaps up and dumps. That's what Tesla's been doing. I think that despite that, there might be a little gap up tomorrow if PCE is aligned with expectations, but then we're going to likely dump later on. If we start off with the dip, we could try to balance, but ultimately I still see us dumping anyways for Tesla. So Tesla remains bearish no matter what happens, whether we get a small bounce or not. The most likely possibility is going to be we make some kind of rebound attempt, whether it's like after market open or before during the pre-market, and then we may just continue to downtrend, especially if 280 fails us. We could just come down to fill that gap towards 250. We still favor the downside. We'll see if we get some kind of bounce first before we end up dumping. But for now, regardless of what kind of bounce we get, we still favor downside. So please keep that in mind for Tesla. Now, SPY is down quite a bit. We dumped 6 days in a row. That's a very, very rare occurrence. And in this case, we actually filled this gap. So we have a very strong support now at 585. If that fails us, we dump to 580, then 575 next. So keep those levels in mind. If we get back above 588 to 589, we're looking for essentially the 590s, then 595 for a bounce. The last 4 days, it's been like SPY gaps up, then dumps, gaps up, then dumps over and over again. That's all we've been doing. Okay. We kind of gapped up, then dumped, gapped up, then dumped, gap up, then dump over and over again. So in this case, the most likely move, if we do follow the trend, is if we get a gap up tomorrow with PCE, we could be dumping all the way down to 585. If that fails us, we're looking for a dump towards the support down here around the 580 area. If it's the opposite, if PCE causes a big dump tomorrow and we already grab liquidity, if we touch like 580 or so first, then I'd be looking for an opposite reaction and move back up to squeeze shorts. So it depends on how we open. Do we gap up or gap down depending on inflation? If we gap up, look for a dump. That's very probable looking at the trend. If we gap up and dump a little bit more at open, then I'll be looking for a bounce. Could go either way depending on if we hold 585. So it depends on inflation. My gut tells me that we do have a little bit more downside coming, so we might see a small dip before this thing tries to bounce. So keep that in mind. For the QQQ, we gapped up and dumped, up, down, over and over again. We just continued to dump. We dumped so hard without much of a bounce, and that's not the best of signs. I do want to mention that there is going to be a gap at 490 to fill. We have this big gap all the way down here. So if we don't hold 500, if 500 fills us, I think we dump to fill the gap to 492. It's also very close to our 200 EMA. If we hold 500, we're looking for a bounce for 505 or so. So we'll see if we get some kind of rebound before we end up dumping like this, or if we just straight up dump. I have a feeling we do try to rebound a little bit before we get that dump. We did that pretty much every day. We kind of rebound and dumped. And that's what we're looking for, at least thus far. So keep that in mind. For the Russell 2000, we're on a big downtrend. We have a head and shoulders like pattern. We're losing our key support. There's no sign of a bounce. We need to reclaim 215 and 218 to bounce. Otherwise, we favor downside for essentially 208 or below. For ES, we might dip a little bit more. We haven't touched our 200 EMA yet. So we might see a test of this before it tries to rebound a little bit. We already dumped so hard, which is why I'm saying that. But like I said before, there's no sign of a bounce yet. So if we kind of open higher, we might be looking for a dip to about 58.25, and then we'll see if we bounce off that. If we reclaim 5900 and hold that, then we're looking for that bounce. Could see a little bit more downside first before we see some kind of rebound. We're going to be watching this 200 EMA, but watch that very, very closely. For NQ, we dumped really hard. We're watching this support at 20,620. If that bounces, if we hold this, we're looking for 20,800. And if we lose that, we're looking for 20,500. We could touch 20,500 before we try to rebound, so watch to see if that ends up being the case. Then we'll see if we get a rejection from there again, some kind of move like this. That's what could be happening. We still look a little bit more bearish, so we could look for 20,500 first before we try to bounce. Otherwise, we favor downside. Bitcoin's at support right here. I do think that we will eventually dump towards this resistance around 75,000. We could bounce first for 85,000 before we start dumping, so just keep that in mind. For Nvda, we're making lower highs, not looking too good, unfortunately, especially when you look at the daily time frame. If we manage to reclaim 125, we're looking for a rebound. If we bounce a bit, that's going to be good. But if we reject, we're looking for a bigger move back down towards 118, then eventually around this like 115 area. So I favor that this could continue to fall like this. We'll see if we get a rebound tomorrow or not. We're technically at support near that 120 area, but we still look bearish on Nvda. No sign of a bounce right now, and also we're making lower highs and lower lows, so Nvidia is technically downtrending. We'll see if we get a rebound or not first, but that is still looking kind of weak. Tesla's very weak. We are going to eventually dump to 250. We'll see if we rebound first, but then we're going to likely continue to fall. For Aapl, we're looking weaker. We got a big rejection on the daily. Not looking too good. We have to see if we can reclaim 238 or not. If not, we could be dumping towards 235, so we still look a bit more bearish. Netflix is rejecting here. We're looking for a test of 951. If that fails us, we're looking for a bigger dump for 912. If we break past 990, we're looking for a bounce, but I'm favoring the downside move for essentially 936 or below. So we still look a bit more bearish on Netflix. Whoops, on MSTR, we look bearish. We have not been able to bounce yet. We're hitting this 250 area. It might dip a little bit more towards our big support right here around this like 230 zone before some buyers try to defend us. So just keep that in mind. For Celsius, we have support at 25.8. If that fails us, we're looking for a dip back down towards 24 flats. And we also have this gap down here to fill. So watch that very closely. For 25, don't forget we have this gap to fill. So we'll see if we get some kind of bounce, but we still look a bit more bearish. Super Micro is also dumping right here. We're going to be looking for 39.5. If that fails us, we're going to be looking to see if we bounce or not. We have a gap down here to fill. I favor 39.5 to 36 before we try to bounce, so it might see a little bit more downside. On Palantir, we're looking to see if we retest 80, and we'll see if we bounce off this. There's no sign of a bounce yet. Watch and see if we hold 80. If that holds, we could be trying to get back up towards the 90 area. But for now, we look a bit more bearish. Rivian is in the middle. We're at some big support right here. We actually managed to hold it at 11.5. We'll see if we get a rebound move back up to 12. So watch and see what kind of reaction we get. So far, it's looking weak. We actually have a left shoulder heading to the right shoulder. So it's showing some weakness. We'll see if we try to reclaim resistance at 15 to bounce. Otherwise, we favor a little bit more downside towards 14 flat or 13.5. And then we'll see what the reaction is. For AMZ, we're getting more and more rejections, so we could be dipping back down towards 97.5 to 95. For ARM, we're rejecting as well. We do favor downside, especially as we have this gap to fill all the way down here. I think we filled the gap to 128 before we try to bounce to look for some more downside. Coin has to hold support. We have a big gap to fill right now around this 190, 193 area. So we'll see if we dip a bit more with PCE Data before it tries to bounce back up to 210. So keep that in mind, guys. We're still showing some weakness. Amazon's flat right now. We have to reclaim 215 to bounce. Otherwise, we favor downside. I'm going to be watching this 205 area to see if we test it before we try to bounce. Meta's looking bearish. We're continuing to make lower highs and lower lows. We tried to bounce, got a rejection, so not a good sign. We're barely holding 657. If we lose that, we're looking for a test of 637 before it tries to bounce. So it's possible it dips a bit more before we get that bounce, so just keep that in mind. Microsoft is bearish. We're making lower highs and lower lows. We could be dipping it back down towards the 389 area, and we'll see if buyers defend. Google's on a big downtrend right now. We'll have to see if you hold support. So make sure you watch 168 to about 166, and we'll see if buyers defend. GameStop's on a bit of a downtrend. We're going to be looking for essentially the 23 area. And then AMC's on a downtrend as well. We're going to be watching to see what happens as we hit the low threes. So watch and see. DJT is looking bearish. We have a gap to fill all the way down here towards this 18 area. So it could cause downside. The VIX is bullish for now, but we're at resistance between 20 and 22. We haven't broken out yet, so be careful. The 10-year has this big gap to fill, so we'll see what kind of reaction we get. The dollar is looking a bit more bullish. It's at resistance at 107.35. So Tesla is bearish. We're going to eventually dump a lot more, but we'll see if we get some kind of rebound move or not with PCE data coming out. I can't promise anything. It depends on these numbers, but for now, the chart remains bearish. We'll see if we get some kind of bounce or not, but otherwise, I do see us eventually coming down to fill this gap. So keep that in mind, guys. I thank you all so much for listening. Please have a good rest of your day. I'll be back tomorrow to talk about how PCE is looking. I appreciate you guys for listening. The market remains more bearish for now, but we'll watch and see what the reaction is with PCE. So be very, very patient. Thank you for listening, guys. I appreciate you guys so much. Thank you for listening, and peace out.